All right, what's up, nerds? This is Cam. Today we're going to be drawing a custom inspector using a reorderable list. I figured I'd just give you a sneak peek of what we're trying to accomplish over the next 3 videos. Essentially, a reorderable list is this element you're seeing on the right here. It's drawing this list above it, action mixins here, but it's redrawing it with some extra functionality. You can drag objects to reorder them, and you can remove from anywhere within the list, which is nice. And also, we're drawing each parameter of, each public parameter of each class in this list, so you can basically do all the work you need to do with these classes within the list itself, which is great. And then we hide the list on the game object, or sorry, we hide the parameter on the game object itself. So if I check this on, you can see the trigger animator class here, and then if I turn it off, it's hidden. And then for adding components, you can add it right from this reorderable list menu. When you add the component, it automatically adds it to the game object and displays it within the list dynamically. If you're coming from my Mixin series on how to create a system using modular code, that's great because I'm building right on top of it. But if you're not, this list display works for any list of classes that you want to display dynamically. So it's a powerful tool, whether you're just coming in for the custom inspector videos or you're starting from the beginning of the series. The reorderable list is not a fully supported function from Unity, so there's not a ton of documentation out there. One good resource online is this blog post. I'll put a link in the description. It's got a really good rundown of how the basic functions of a reorderable list work. It's where I got most of my knowledge from, and then I just built upon it from there with experimenting. That being said, if you follow along with these videos, you'll learn everything from that's in this blog post, but it's definitely a good reference if you're having any trouble. Also, all my code will be up on GitHub, so you can always check that out, and let me know if I'm doing anything wrong, because I'm relatively new to custom inspectors as well, and I'd really appreciate your feedback. So I hope you enjoy the video. Okay, so the only changes I've made in this project since my last video is I simplified the fire logic on this rifle a little bit. And if you remember what this class does, it's essentially just a list of check mixins and action mixins, and it iterates through and checks the return on the checks and then calls the actions on the actions. And we're going to overwrite this, so we're going to display each different class type in the action mixins list, because it's a list of mixin bases, but what we have here is a whole bunch of different classes that are all mixin bases, and we're going to display all the different types of parameters in one custom inspector here. So I have a script here called call action mixins inspector, and we're going to use that to overwrite our custom inspector here. The only changes I've made to these scripts is I've made mixin base and call mixin actions. I've added system.serializable attribute because serialized classes play nicer with the custom inspectors, and they have all the built-in like undo and redo functionality, which is nice to have. And then on mixin base, I actually gave it a public string of name, and we're just going to use that to display like a label for each element that we draw for each mixin base in our list. And that'll be nice because then you can give your different components different display names within the inspector. So just to get started, we have to set up a few things to be able to use this class as a custom inspector. The first is going to be using Unity Editor, which is going to have a lot of the functions and types we need, and using Unity Editor Internal. And using Unity Editor Internal is where you get not fully supported functions, like the reorderable list that we're going to be using. We have to inherit from the editor class, and we have to give it an attribute targeting which type of component we're going to be writing a new inspector for. So we can do that with the attribute of custom editor and then the type. So we'll say type of call action mixins, or call mixin actions, sorry. And then we can get rid of this junk and just declare a couple public variables here, or not public but global. We can say we need a reorderable list, and we'll call this our mixin list. And we're going to have a reference to the call mixin action that we are currently overwriting. So we'll just do call mixin action, and we'll just call it, this is our call mixin action that we are overwriting right now. So we can set those up in on enable. And in on enable, we're going to say our call mixin action is equal to a casted version of our target. And target is a variable we're getting from the editor base class that we've inherited from, and it's basically the target for this inspector. And we know that's going to be a call mixin action because we specified that in our custom editor attribute, so we have no problem casting that to target. But actually the first thing we should do is say that if target equals null, something has gone wrong and we're going to jump out of here. Not null. Return. But if it's not null, then we can set up our reorderable list. So, or we called it mixin list, eh? So we'll call this mixin list equals new reorderable list. And the first thing that there's a couple parameters that it takes here. So the first thing we're going to give it is the target serialized object, which is returned from our editor class as well. And it's a serialized version of our call mixin actions. So we're going to pass that in, the serialized object, and then we're going to pull a property from there that we want our list to overwrite. So again, using our serialized object, we're going to find a property, and that property is going to be action mixin. So I'm just going to copy this, and then you can send in a string to find property, and it'll pull a serialized version of that property out from there. And then after that, we just have 4 bools here. We have draggable, display header, display add button, and display remove button. So if you don't want them to be able to add or remove, you can put false there. If you don't want a title, you can put false for display header. And if you don't want them to be able to drag items to reorder the list, you can put false there. But we want all that functionality for today. So I'm just going to put true across the board. And then we have a reorderable list all set up. That's pretty much all you need to do for that. And now we can draw it. So we can override our on inspector GUI here. Which is basically what is called when like Unity is drawing this inspector, but we can override it and draw it ourselves. One thing that's nice to do, at least while we're working on it, is we can say draw default inspector, and that's going to draw the regular inspector for this class, and then we can also add whatever we want to draw. So we can draw our mixin list here. So we can say mixin list do layout list. And that should be set up just fine there. Sometimes when you originally start making a custom inspector like this, it's good to just close your script and reopen it. You'll get sometimes like a weird error. It seems to be working though. But if it's telling you that multi-editing is not supported, just close your script and reopen it and it should work fine. Again, we're working in this Unity editor internal, which isn't fully supported, so you can't complain about the occasional bug. But if we pop onto our FireLogic, we have our reorderable list here, and it's working perfectly. So essentially, like element 0 to 4 here is these 5 classes in this list. So if we drag element 0 down, you can see trigger animator moving up and down, just like so. So that's really nice. That's functionality that we don't have in our regular list layout. We can also delete from anywhere in the list, and that's functionality we don't have in our regular list layout. And that in and of itself is really handy. Obviously it doesn't look very nice right now. It doesn't even have a name, but we can override that and draw whatever we want and actually make it a lot more usable in our custom lists there. So if I can do that by using these callbacks, and a reorderable list has a whole list of callbacks, and you can look that up online. Each callback has a signature, which is like some properties associated with it, and we can use that callback and those properties that it gives us to kind of write our own drawing functions for different things within the list. So the first callback we're going to use is the draw element callback. And the syntax for writing this is a bit odd. It's a standard C# lambda expression, which is not something that I'm familiar with. It's not really used in Unity, so you might not have seen it either. But essentially, it's similar to a delegate, and it's just written like this. It's the callback equals, and then the list of parameters. So for the draw element callback, we have 4 parameters. So there's a rect, which is the position of the element, and we'll just call this rect. And then there's an int, which is the index of the element. So what position of the list are we in? And then there's 2 bools. Bool is active, and bool is focused. I believe that's right. And then you use a operator called an expression lambda, which is this equal sign arrow kind of thing, and then 2 curly brackets, and you can declare the expression. So it's properties and an expression. So it's very similar to a method, except it's declared within another method. But it's gonna call the same way. So what we can do now is draw our own element using these properties that it's given us. So what we can do is use this index to find a serialized version of the mixin that's at that index of the list. So the way we can do that is go into our mixin list. Or, well, we should create a serialized property first. So we'll do serialized property, and this is our element. And then we will go into our mixin list. And we want the serialized version of our mixin list. And then we're going to say get array element at index. And then we're going to pass our index in there. And that function basically returns a serialized version of the element that's at that index. So at index 0, it's going to get the first element in that list and return a serialized property of that. And then you should be able to pull properties right from there with element find property relative. So I should be able to say element find property relative and send in the string of for example, name, and it will return the string that is the name of that object. But for me, find property relative always returns null. I can't get it to work. If anyone knows what I'm doing wrong, that would be really helpful. But I found a workaround for it, so you can find a serialized object from this element and then use find property just like we did when we were finding that list property. And that works just fine. So we can do that. We can create a serialized object, and we'll call it element object. And element object is going to be a new serialized object. And then we're going to send in a reference to elements, which is our serialized property relative object. So we can do element get what is it, object reference value, and that'll return the serialized object for the element at this array index. And that's all we need, so we can start pulling properties out of there and displaying them. So the first property we can get is the name, just to see which element is which one. And it's not hard to do. We can create a editor GUI label field just to display that name right now. So we can say editor GUI label field, and then for the position, we'll use this rect because this is where this element is being drawn. So we'll do we'll create our own rect, but we'll use the properties of the rect that's given us. So we called that rect, so we'll do rect.x and rect.y for the position of this, of where we're going to draw this. And then for the width, we'll use rect.width, and for the height, we actually want to get a single, like a line height of an editor property. And we're going to have to do that a bunch, so we might as well make some variables here. So we can do float line height, and float line height space, because we're going to want to draw our properties at a line height, but we're going to want to draw our elements at a line height with a bit of space so they're not all squished together. And then we can set this here, and on enable, we'll say line height equals editor GUI utility and single line height, and that'll return what a standard property height is. And that'll work nice. And then we can do line height space is equal to line height plus 10. And that'll give us 10 pixels underneath each property that we draw, which looks nice. Excuse me. So then here in our rect, for our height, we can just put line height. And then, so then the next property, it can just take in a string for the actual label. But we have to find that string from our serialized object that we have here. So we can do element object and find property, and we're going to find name, and we're going to say we want the string value because we know that this is going to be a string because we made this class. But if you want to be more general and a little more modular, you can use a property field. And a property field takes whatever property you give it and gives it the appropriate like property display for an editor, which is nice, which is really nice. And we'll use that when we display all the properties for our classes because we don't know exactly what they're all going to be. But for this label, we're gonna kind of hard code this in because we want a name displayed for each one. But we're gonna use property fields in a minute. But for now, let's just pop out and make sure that this is working. Oh, and it's not. Oh, this is rect.y, not rext. Okay, so now I just went in before this video, sorry, and I set all these names. Just a brief description here. So now we have labels for each of our classes. We know we get a brief description of what each one is, so it's a little easier to organize. But now we want more information. So let's display all the properties of each class in each element here. And that's not hard to do, even though they're all different types of classes. What we can do is create an iterator. We can create an iterator that will loop through every property of each class, and then we can display it through that with a property field. So in our draw element callback, the first thing we need to do is make an iterator, and an iterator is a serialized property. So we'll do serialize property, and we'll call this property iterator, and that's going to equal our element object get iterator, and that'll return the iterator we need to loop through our object here. So then we can create this loop, and we'll say while our property iterator next visible, so while it still has another property to loop through, we'll continue this loop. And the bool that we're sending in is asking whether or not it wants to check its children of the properties within our iterator. And we do want to check that because if there's a list in our class, then we want to display all the child objects of that list so that we can get that information instead of just seeing that there is a list there. So that should work fine. And then, excuse me. And then all we have to do is display this in a property field. So we can say editor GUI dot property field. And then for our rect, we're going to do a very similar thing. We're going to make a new rect, and then use rect.x, and then for rect.y, we actually want to do, we want to increment our rect.y, so each time we draw a property, we draw it on the next line. Excuse me. So you can create an integer here, and then we'll do rect.y plus, and then we'll do line height space times I. So that'll be our single line height plus that 10 pixels. For every property we do, it'll move the rect down that much. And then our width and height are going to remain the same. So we'll do rect.width, rect.width, and single line height. Or just line height, sorry. And then all we need to do is pass in the property that we want to display, and all that is our property iterator. So property iterator. And that should display everything nicely there. And then, oh yeah, of course we have to iterate I each loop through, and that should be good there. So if we pop back over here, yeah, so it's working, but it doesn't change the height of each element. So it's writing them all on top of each other right now. But if you kind of look closely, you can see you're getting that, like this is our animator class, and you can see the reference to that animator. You can see the trigger string that we send into that animator. And if we open it up down here, like those are the values that we need. So it's working fine. And then all we have to do is change the height. And there's an easy way to do that with another one of these callbacks. So there's a callback, and all it's for is drawing the height of each element. So we can do mix and list, and then draw element, height. Element height callback. And that only has one parameter, which is the index of the element that it's drawing. And then we can... oh yeah, it's giving an error because we're not returning anything right now. So we can say float height equals 0, and then return height. And then whatever we return here is going to be the height of this element. And unfortunately, I haven't figured out a nicer way to do this just yet. If anyone can think of one, that would be great. But I haven't been able to figure out how to pass properties from this callback to this callback at that index, because it doesn't call them one after the other. So I haven't come up with a clean way to do this. So what I've been doing is just I iterate through the list in this callback, and then I iterate through like the list of property children in this callback, and then I also do it in the height callback. So what I'm doing here is I'm just copy and pasting what I have before. So I'm copy and pasting my code for getting my serialized property, for getting my serialized object, for getting my property iterator, and then for looping through this. And the only thing I don't need is drawing this property field. So then we can increment I and then return, and then then we just need to do height equals line height space times I. And that should work perfectly fine. And there you go. So now it now looks really nice. You can see each of our so it's drawing my so it's drawing my name property. Sorry, I'll pull this back. It's drawing my name property over my my first child property from my iterator. So what I actually want to do here is I want to set I to be 1 to start with. So then it'll start on line number 2, and same goes for here because we need to account for that extra height. And then when we draw it, so now we have our label here, animator, and then all of the parameters that we would need to see. And there's still some overlapping going on here. Oh, not height equals 1. Sorry, I equals 1. Start I to equal 1. And then that should work nicely. There we go. That's much nicer. So now we got all our different classes here are being very nicely drawn. We can see all the components here. So just in this one inspector here, I have all this information from down here. So I don't need to see these at all anymore. And what we'll do is we'll turn them off in the inspector, so then all your logic going on this game object will just be held in this one inspector here, which will be really nice. Okay, so I think I'm just going to leave it at that. I hope you guys liked it. I think it's a nice way to display this information from classes that you don't get any of this functionality in the default list layout here. So this is a really nice overwrite. In the next video, I'll add some functionality to these buttons so you can add new mixins directly from the project view using this add button here. And but you don't just have to use it for mixins. Any list of classes that you want to display, you can overwrite with a reorderable list. They're really handy, and it wasn't that hard. Like, we got all this functionality in about 20 minutes. So I know I was rushing, but just take your time when you're working on it, and reference that blog post that I talked about at the beginning, because it's a really good base for learning this stuff. It's where I got all my information, and then I just built on it from there. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.